The other big club figure that I think we can't gloss over. I think we from the scouted football angle, it it is to do with scouting is Stuart Webber, who's of course sort of the director of football. Seeing him operate close quarters as you will have done. His relationship with Daniel Farke, the joined up thinking, the alignment, his vision for the club, his vision for the future, but also his own future. I mean, there's a lot on the table there with Stuart Webber. There's a lot to get into. So feel free to just completely wax lyrical, because I'm just going to be sat here gawping at how effective an operator he is. But there's a reason why he is in the role that he is, that he's come through, the positions that was it Wrexham, Liverpool, Huddersfield beforehand to become sort of the transfers chief as it is at Norwich.
Yeah, he's it's really interesting with Stuart Webber, because again, you're right. I feel like I know what he's done quite well and things like that. And sometimes you're curious. It's like, well, I wonder what other people who haven't followed it deem that he's done. I mean, he did come through these different roles, and I remember the first thing anyone said to me about him just before he was being appointed at Norwich was, "Oh, he's a man in a hurry," which struck me as an interesting thing to be said. I think the way he picked up his journey is fascinating. It's worth anyone listening to the High Performance podcast, because I know he did that with Jake Humphrey and Damien Hughes, isn't it? And sorry to plug another podcast, Joe. But
you can plug any athletic ones on here as you want. I've had Alex Stewart from Tifo on, and we like to say that get as many recommendations in as you can. I like to think that perhaps people might recommend a scouted one elsewhere, but hey, we can all dream.
Absolutely. Oh, what a man Alex is, by the way. So yeah, it's worth listening to that to get maybe a grounding on where Stuart has come from, because he's come from nowhere really to really develop this career, which I think ultimately, and you have to sort of remind yourself that when you look at what Huddersfield did, that was almost entirely on what Stuart led, because he was the defining factor as to how it changed in those few years. It was sort of bumbling along. He got hold of it. They got promoted. He left just before they went up. And admittedly, they did stay up, but I think some of that was a legacy of his recruitment plans and whatnot. And then, it unraveled effectively. And I think, and then what's happened at Norwich, it happened at the point where I was watching this team going, right, I'm now ready. Having yo-yoed, I'm now ready for 3 or 4 years of complete mediocrity here, because this is a massive change. And the 1 year I said that, they went and won the championship. It was ludicrous. I think Stuart, it is his vision. It is the way he pulls everything together and leads it. It's little details like the imagery around the changing the training ground, walking into a training ground and going, why have we got all these, porta cabins? Why is this club been in the Premier League for the last 7 years, yet they've done nothing to their training ground in 25 years? What, this place is rubbish. It is not a top of the class training ground as I look at it. Why has no one done anything to develop it? Which, they hadn't, because it had all gone on trying to develop the team. And that's so difficult for every team, every club that's promoted. It's a horrendous situation to deal with, especially when you're in Norwich's situation where no one's writing you a check to buy any players. So that vision probably helps being, a fresh pair of eyes and going in, but not just the vision, but then making it happen. Norwich came up with a way of crowdfunding, £5 million to redevelop the training ground when they were running out of parachute payments. It happened that they went up and they could pay the loan straight back. But, they did something at that point when it was the last thing they should have been doing, really. They should have done it way before that. He had to manage a financial situation that was far worse than he envisaged when he took the job on, to be honest. And I think he had some really difficult times. He was faced with the personal, what would you call it? The sort of personal niggle in the back of his mind, I suppose, that he'd left Huddersfield, who'd just gone up, to this absolute mess of a state of things at Norwich. So there's a lot of personal development that's gone into that. But as I say, it's not just the vision; it's carrying it out, and it's probably motivating people to go and do it as well. I think possibly sometimes he gets credit for everything, and probably being the figure point of it and the driving force for it attracts that attention. He's the one who speaks about it, but he's actually very good at having the right people around him, and they will do things. A lot of the recruitment work comes from a recruitment team who are really bright and they know what they're doing, and they get the faith from Stuart to then deliver on that. So I think that's what he does. I think you look at a football team on a pitch and you think, well, the best managers are the ones who have a team that is worth more than the sum of its parts. Because clearly, if you've just got a load of individuals, then that's up to the individuals, isn't it? And I think Stuart does that, managing a group of people. And I think anyone associated with Norwich should be hugely proud of where the club is, because it just looks so coherent. And even if they're blagging the plan, sometimes it looks like everything has happened completely by design. But that comes from the degree of planning and contingency. And Norwich have gone through COVID without any kind of benefactor putting any money in, and they've managed to ride it out. Whereas the only real issue has been the fact that it's meant that they probably have to sell a player this window to have more money to spend in the transfer window. It's not like they've been completely screwed by that 30 million hole, £30 million hole. So I just think it's a club in his image and the people he's managed to work so well with. And this is probably where, if we take it right back to the start of the podcast, I see how well it's going, and I know how fragile these things are. He is desperate to make sure that he leaves the club and goes on to do whatever he wants to do next. And I don't even think he knows what that is. Although, I don't know, maybe he just won't say it, because he does strike me as a man with a plan. But, it is so fragile. It's going to be a really difficult act to follow him, as it will be with Daniel Farke whenever he leaves. They both have contracts. They are both open about their contracts, and they've both been open about the fact they end in June 2022. I think the hope is now that Daniel Farke will sign some sort of extension, I think. But whether that happens, how long that is beyond Stuart Webber being there, is a difficult one, because maybe it depends on what role Daniel has with the new sporting director. And I have no answers. I don't know if anyone has any answers, and that's a difficulty. And that may, in fairness, will be the true sign of Stuart Webber's legacy. And I don't think that would be saying anything he doesn't know himself. I think there's a bit of him that hates that he helped get Huddersfield to where they were, and then having left, probably without a degree of succession planning, because he probably wasn't expecting to leave for Norwich, 6 to 8 months earlier. It just unraveled. And so it was particularly unstable, because that's what history tells us now. With Norwich, if Norwich still carry all of these values, all of this narrative and perception that they have now, if they carry that in 5 to 10 years' time, and he's been gone, for a good period of that, I think that would be the true legacy of what Stuart Webber has achieved. And that's maybe quite harsh, because he can't control what people after him do, but they are trying to create these cultures and values across the club that do withstand that. So we'll have to see. But it's very hard to underplay what he's done for the football club. And I think you listen to the owners, Delia and Michael, talk about where the club is now and all the things they've had to go through in the time they've been custodians of the club since 1996-97. I think that speaks volumes for everything that's happened and what Stuart Webber and his team have achieved.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's about, as you say there, just developing this framework, the framework that is Norwich City now in sort of the Webber era, if you want to say that, that carrying that on once he has left, because obviously, as you say, he's been open about his contract. He's openly stated that he would plan to move on in future. And from Norwich supporters that I've spoken to, they wouldn't begrudge him that. They're very open about the fact that he's obviously been massive for the club. But it's about, yes, I think there probably is an element, but with him, that he wants to leave the club in a fit state so that it can essentially be self-sufficient even without him, so that the Webber framework can be there, but it can be managed by somebody else, a different body, which I think the Huddersfield example is a very good one, because the succession planning that you were referring to there, I think that it was clear that wasn't in place, and the recruitment essentially went to being a bit scattergun afterwards, and you get this influx of cash and maybe a little bit of not turmoil, but sort of turbulence, turnover at boardroom level, and then everything can be scrapped, and that framework that he'd built with Huddersfield in the Championship essentially grew cobwebs very quickly, and as a result the club suffered. So I think he's a very fascinating listen, and the High Performance podcast, as you said, it was one of the things I listened to before recording this podcast, before reading up about Stuart Webber, because he is just such an interesting guy. His philosophy, the way that he plans things out, he's meticulous. The whole prior planning prevents poor performance as a mantra, essentially, I think is something that would epitomize him quite well. And in terms of footballing directorship, he is essentially probably, I'd say, one of the most transparent, but also one of the most effective that I think we have in the current game, especially in England. So yeah, he's definitely somebody who, if he were to move on from Norwich in 2022, or if he were to get an extension and move on in future, I think any club that would take him on would be, I mean, obviously you'll know this, but I think from my perspective, any club who takes him on would be getting I mean, we talk about how players, £30 million players, can change a team. What about a sporting director who can, he can revolutionise two separate clubs and get them promoted to the riches of the Premier League? I mean, can you put a price on that? I can't.
I mean, likewise, both clubs, he's had the right freedom. I mean, I struggle to think of a club above Norwich's level where he would get the freedom he's got here.
Yeah.
So he has had the right environment, and like any player, with £30 million player, if they go into a team and they're not used properly, or they can't do what they want to do, it's pointless, isn't it? It's a complete waste of money. And I think that is why, as I said, I don't even know if Stuart will end up staying in football. He might do something completely different. He's that sort of a character that you just don't know. And I think, but I think that next football job for him will be fascinating if it comes, because he'll want a big job, but with big job usually comes big owners, big money, and people don't like relinquishing what that brings them, which is generally control. So I think, again, it's just probably being appreciative of the fact that he got to come into Norwich and literally said, he asked, well, what do you want? It's like, you do what you want, you go and do it, or how you want to view it, do it. And it's, again, why there's so much credit needs to go his way, because he's had the opportunity, but he has shaped this almost exactly as he would have liked to, and he's delivered on it, and he's been allowed to do it.
Yeah, certainly. I think we talk about players needing the freedom. I think essentially he has been allowed to build a club in his own image, and the framework, the evidence is there that he's able to do it.